The steel gates slammed shut behind me with a metallic clang that echoed across Crystal Lake. I stood there, still holding my morning coffee, watching through the wrought iron bars as Karen Whitfield, the HOA president, with her perfectly pressed khakis and clipboard of authority, padlocked the only entrance to the state trail I'd walked every morning for 3 years. "This is private property now," she announced to the small crowd of confused joggers and dog walkers gathering behind me. "Lakewood Estates, residents only. Everyone else needs to find somewhere else to exercise." The woman had no idea she'd just declared war on someone who owned not just this trail, but every single mile of the entire state trail system stretching across 4 counties. But I wasn't about to tell her that. Not yet. 3 months earlier, life had been beautifully simple. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., grab my coffee, and take the short walk from my modest house on Pine Street to the Crystal Lake Trail entrance. The 5-mile loop around the pristine lake had become my sanctuary, a place where I could clear my head before diving into the complexities of managing a multi-million-dollar trail network that most people had no idea I controlled. You see, I'm not your typical trail owner. 20 years ago, when the state was hemorrhaging money and looking to privatize non-essential services, I'd quietly purchased the management rights to the entire Western State Trail system through my company, Pathways LLC. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady income maintenance contracts, permit fees, and the occasional land lease kept the books balanced while giving me the freedom to live simply. The Crystal Lake Trail was the crown jewel of the system, winding through protected wetlands and offering stunning views that attracted hikers from hundreds of miles away. I'd personally overseen every bridge repair, every mile marker placement, and every erosion control project along its length. This wasn't just any trail to me, it was my life's work. But to the residents of Lakewood Estates, the newly constructed gated community that bordered the lake's eastern shore, I was just another outsider cluttering up their pristine neighborhood. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in early September. I was about 2 miles into my usual route when a perfectly manicured woman in expensive athletic wear stepped directly into my path. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with a kind of authority that comes from never being told no. "I'm Karen Whitfield, president of the Lakewood Estates Homeowners Association. I don't recognize you as one of our residents." I paused, taking in her aggressive stance and the way she positioned herself to block the entire width of the trail. "I don't live in Lakewood Estates," I replied calmly. "I live over on Pine Street. I've been walking this trail for years." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, that's going to need to change. This trail runs directly through our community, and we're implementing new security measures. Residents only, I'm afraid." "Ma'am, this is a public trail," I explained, keeping my voice level despite the absurdity of the conversation. "It's been public access for over 30 years. Karen's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Not anymore? We've done our research, Mr. Johnson, David Johnson. Well, Mr. Johnson, we've consulted with our legal team, and they've assured us that any trail running through private property can be restricted by the property owners. Lakewood Estates now controls access to this entire section." I wanted to explain that she was not only wrong about the law, but that she was talking to the actual owner of the trail system. Instead, I simply nodded and said, "I'll look into it." That night, I pulled up the property surveys and legal documents I hadn't reviewed in years. The trail system's right-of-way agreements were ironclad, predating every development in the area by decades. Lakewood Estates had been built around the trail, not the other way around. Their own property deeds explicitly acknowledged the public trail easement. But I was curious to see how far Karen Whitfield would take her little power trip before I shut it down. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, I arrived at the trail entrance to find Karen standing beside a folding table loaded with clipboards and official-looking documents. She'd brought reinforcements, 3 other women who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog, all wearing matching Lakewood Estates HOA polo shirts. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," Karen called out with false sweetness. "Before you can access the trail today, we'll need you to sign this liability waiver and pay the daily access fee." I walked closer to examine the papers. The liability waiver was a hastily printed document that would have made any lawyer laugh out loud, and the daily access fee was set at an eye-watering $25. $25? I asked, genuinely amused. "That's the non-resident rate," explained one of Karen's associates, a blonde woman whose name tag read Jennifer HOA Secretary. "We've determined this fee is necessary to cover increased maintenance and security costs due to outside usage." I glanced around at the immaculately maintained trail maintained, I might add, by the crew I employed and budgeted for through Pathways LLC. These women had no idea they were charging me to walk on infrastructure I personally funded. "And if I don't want to pay?" I asked. Karen's smile turned predatory. "Then you'll need to find somewhere else to exercise. We've already contacted the county sheriff's office about potential trespassing issues." The absurdity was almost entertaining. Almost. I paid the $25 in cash, signed their ridiculous waiver with a flourish, and took my walk. But as I rounded the first bend, I could already see Karen on her phone, probably coordinating with her legal team about their next move. Over the following weeks, the harassment escalated systematically. First, they installed temporary barriers that forced trail users to walk single file through a narrow checkpoint, where Karen or one of her associates would be waiting with their clipboards and fee collection. Then they added security patrols, golf cart driving volunteers, who would follow non-residents at a distance, taking photos and making notes. The daily access fee jumped to $50, then $75. Other long-time trail users began finding alternate routes or giving up entirely. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who'd been walking the trail with her granddaughter every weekend for 5 years, was brought to tears when Karen demanded to see proof of residence and threatened to call the police when she couldn't provide it. That's when I realized this had stopped being amusing. On a crisp October morning, I arrived to find the entrance completely transformed. The simple wooden gate that had marked the trailhead for decades was gone, replaced by an imposing steel barrier topped with decorative spikes. Expensive-looking security cameras were mounted on new posts, and a large sign declared, "PRIV a TEPROPERT YLAKEW ODEST a TASRE CAAASE YENT SO NL YVAOA AEU VAAA DEBOY." Karen emerged from a new guard shack, an actual building they'd constructed overnight, carrying a tablet and wearing what appeared to be a custom-made uniform, complete with a badge reading HOA Security Director. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson," she said, though her tone suggested she was anything but sorry. "The board voted last night. Public access to the trail is officially terminated. This is now a private amenity for Lakewood Estates residents only." I stared at the gate, then at Karen, then at the cameras that were undoubtedly recording our conversation. "You can't just privatize a public trail." "We absolutely can, and we have," Karen replied, consulting her tablet. "Our legal team has filed all necessary paperwork with the county. The trail now falls under our community's jurisdiction." That's when she made her fatal mistake. "In fact," Karen continued, her voice rising with a thrill of absolute power, "we're considering expanding our control to the entire trail system in this region. There's no reason the county should be managing recreational facilities when private communities can do it better." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just about my morning walk anymore. Karen Whitfield was talking about taking over my entire business, the trail network I'd spent 2 decades building and maintaining. "Is that so?" I asked quietly. "Oh, yes," Karen said, warming to her subject. "Jennifer's husband works in county planning, and he's told us how much the government spends on trail maintenance every year. Completely wasteful. A well-organized HOA could run the whole system at half the cost, while actually turning a profit." She gestured toward the lake where several Lakewood Estates residents were jogging past, pointedly ignoring the growing crowd of frustrated hikers gathering at the locked gate. "This is just the beginning, Mr. Johnson. By next spring, we expect to have management control over every trail from Crystal Lake to Meadowbrook State Park. Think of it as privatization for the public good." I nodded slowly, pulling out my phone. "That's a very ambitious plan, Karen. You've really thought this through." "We certainly have. The board has already approved the expansion budget." "Well then," I said, opening my camera app, "I guess I should document this historic moment." I took several photos of Karen standing proudly in front of her new gate and security setup, making sure to capture the private property signs and the locked entrance. She posed willingly, clearly believing she was being photographed for her moment of triumph. "Make sure you get my good side," she joked, adjusting her uniform. "Oh, I will," I assured her. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, Marcus Webb, who'd handled the original trail system acquisition and had been waiting 20 years for someone to provide this level of entertainment. "They did what?" Marcus asked, and I could hear him laughing even before I finished explaining the situation. "Locked the gates, installed security cameras, and declared the entire public trail system their private property." "David, do you realize what a gift this woman has just given you?" I was beginning to. The second call was to the county sheriff's office, specifically to Sheriff Patricia Martinez, whom I had worked with on numerous trail safety issues over the years. "Patricia, I need to report a theft of public property and conspiracy to defraud the county government." "Excuse me?" I explained the situation in detail, including Karen's stated plans to take over the entire trail system. Patricia listened without interrupting, though I could hear her taking notes. "David, are you telling me these people have barricaded and illegally seized control of a public trail? Not just any trail. The main access point to a trail system that generates over $2 million in annual tourism revenue for the county. And they're charging admission to use public property? $75 per day, last I checked." There was a long pause. "I'll have deputies there within the hour." The third call was to Janet Morrison at the County Planning Department, the same department where Jennifer's husband allegedly worked. "Janet, I need you to pull the file on Crystal Lake Trail access rights and have a chat with whoever's been feeding information to the Lakewood Estates HOA." "Information about what?" "About allegedly transferring management control of the trail system to private entities." Janet's voice turned sharp. "David, nobody in this department would ever suggest such a thing. The trail system is one of our most valuable public assets." I was hoping you'd say that. By sunset, the wheels of justice were already turning. I spent that evening reviewing 20 years of contracts, maintenance records, and legal documents. Pathways, LLC's ownership of the trail system was absolutely unambiguous. More importantly, the public access easements were permanent and irrevocable. They literally could not be transferred or terminated under any circumstances. Karen Whitfield had effectively declared war on both the county government and a private business owner who held more legal authority over the trail system than she could possibly imagine. The next morning, I woke up early and made my coffee as usual. But instead of heading to the trail entrance alone, I was joined by Sheriff Martinez, 2 deputy sheriffs, County Attorney Richard Barnes, and Marcus Webb. We arrived at the Crystal Lake Trail entrance at exactly 7 a.m. to find Karen already stationed in her guard shack, apparently ready for another day of collecting illegal fees and turning away the public. She emerged with her tablet and clipboard, took one look at our group, and her confident demeanor visibly cracked. "Good morning, officers," she said, her voice suddenly much higher than usual. "I hope there hasn't been some kind of misunderstanding." Sheriff Martinez stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Martinez. We're here to investigate reports of theft of public property and illegal collection of fees for access to public facilities." "I think there's been some kind of mistake," Karen said, glancing nervously at the cameras that were now recording her interaction with law enforcement. "This is private property. We have every right to control access." County Attorney Barnes opened a leather folder and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Mrs. Whitfield, these are the original easement agreements for the Crystal Lake Trail, filed with the county in 1987. The trail and a 50-foot corridor on either side are permanently designated for public use. Your community was built with full knowledge of these restrictions." Karen's face had gone pale, but she wasn't backing down. "Our legal team researched this thoroughly. We were assured that property owners have the right to control access through their developments." "Ma'am," Sheriff Martinez said, "your legal team gave you incorrect information. What you've done here constitutes theft of public property and potentially conspiracy to defraud the county government." That's when Marcus stepped forward with the document I'd been waiting to use. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm Marcus Webb, representing the actual owner of this trail system." He handed her a certified copy of the Pathways LLC ownership agreement. "My client has been documenting your illegal activities for the past month." Karen stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. "Owner? What owner?" "This is a county trail." "No, ma'am," Marcus continued. "This trail system has been privately owned and managed by Pathways LLC since 2003. The county contracts maintenance and security services, but the actual ownership lies with my client." Karen's eyes darted between the document and our group. "So who exactly is your client?" Marcus gestured toward me. "David Johnson." The moment of recognition was beautiful. Karen's mouth opened and closed several times without sound emerging. She looked down at the ownership documents again, then back at me, then at the expensive security installation she'd built around my property. "You," she whispered. "Me," I confirmed. But you live on Pine Street. You're just a regular person. A regular person who owns the trail system you've been illegally seizing control of." Sheriff Martinez stepped in before Karen could respond. "Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for theft of public property, conspiracy to defraud the county, and operating an illegal toll collection operation." As the sheriff read Karen her rights, Jennifer and the other HOA board members who had arrived to help with the morning shift stood frozen by their folding tables, looking like they'd witnessed a natural disaster. But that was just the beginning. Within hours, the story had spread throughout the county. Local news stations arrived to interview confused Lakewood Estates residents who had no idea their HOA president had been operating an illegal toll road operation on someone else's property. The headlines were delicious. HOA president arrested for stealing trail she didn't know she didn't own, and local woman tries to privatize trail system. Discovers she's been charging the actual owner. But the real satisfaction came in the following weeks. The county launched a full investigation into the Lakewood Estates HOA's finances, discovering that Karen had collected over $15,000 in illegal fees over the previous months. Every penny had to be returned to the trail users who had been extorted, plus penalties and interest. The expensive security installation, the gates, cameras, guard shack, and barriers had all been built on property that belonged to me. Karen and the HOA board were liable for both the cost of removal and the restoration of the original trail entrance. Jennifer's husband, it turned out, didn't work for the county planning department at all. He was a junior accountant at a completely different government agency who had apparently been making up stories to impress his wife's friends. The county attorney's office was not amused by the deception. The Lakewood Estates Board of Directors, facing massive legal bills and potential criminal charges, voted unanimously to remove Karen as president and issued a groveling public apology to both the county and to me personally. But my favorite moment came 3 weeks later. I was taking my usual morning walk when I noticed a familiar figure approaching from the opposite direction. Karen Whitfield, no longer wearing her custom uniform, was walking the trail with what appeared to be court-mandated community service vest and a trash collection stick. She looked up as we passed, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Good morning, Karen," I said pleasantly. "Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it?" She mumbled something that might have been a greeting and continued picking up litter. It was then that I noticed the small placard that had been installed near the original trail entrance, a modest sign that read, "Crystal Lake Trail, maintained and protected by Pathways, LLC, public access, guaranteed in perpetuity." Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply letting people experience the natural consequences of their own actions. As I completed my loop around the lake, I reflected on the strange turn my quiet life had taken. For 20 years, I'd managed the trail system from the shadows, content to let people assume it was just another government service. Karen Whitfield's power-hungry overreach had forced me to step into the light, but it had also demonstrated something important about the value of public spaces and the danger of letting private interests control access to them. The trail was busier than ever now, with hikers and joggers who had been scared away by Karen's illegal toll operation returning in droves. Many of them recognized me as the guy who owns the trails and would nod or wave as we passed. Some would stop to thank me for keeping the trail system public and accessible. I'd never set out to be a local hero. I'd just wanted to take my morning walk without being hassled by someone who thought a clipboard and a uniform gave her authority over public property. But if Karen Whitfield wanted to declare war on the wrong person, I was happy to show her what actual power looked like. 6 months later, I received a letter from the new Lakewood Estates HOA board. They wanted to discuss the possibility of a partnership. Perhaps they could help maintain the portion of the trail that ran along their community in exchange for some kind of recognition or naming rights. I wrote back with a simple response: "Thank you for your interest." The trail system is operating perfectly as designed. No changes necessary. Some people never learn that the best way to control something is simply to leave it alone. But every morning, as I sip my coffee and watch the sunrise over Crystal Lake, I'm reminded that sometimes the universe has a wonderful sense of justice. Karen Whitfield wanted to own the trails, and instead, she discovered they were already owned by someone with 20 years more experience than she had and about 1,000 times more legal authority. The trail system continues to thrive under my quiet management, serving thousands of visitors every year while generating sustainable revenue for maintenance and improvements. I've even expanded the network, adding 2 new sections that connect to neighboring state parks. And every morning, I still take my walk around Crystal Lake, enjoying the peaceful certainty that comes from knowing exactly who controls the path beneath my feet. Karen Whitfield learned an expensive lesson about the difference between perceived power and actual authority. But more importantly, she learned that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you don't know who you're fighting against. The trail remains open to everyone, as it always was and always will be. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply being right from the very beginning. But Karen Whitfield's story wasn't quite over yet. 2 months after her arrest, I was reviewing monthly maintenance reports in my home office when my phone rang. Marcus Webb's name appeared on the caller ID. "David, you're going to love this," he said, barely containing his laughter. "Karen Whitfield is suing you." I nearly spit out my coffee. "She's what?" "She's filed a lawsuit claiming you deliberately concealed your identity to entrap her into illegal activity." She's seeking damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and something called reputational harm. The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who had illegally seized control of my property, charged people to use public trails, and threatened to expand her operation across 4 counties, was now claiming I had somehow victimized her by not immediately revealing my ownership. Marcus, please tell me you're recording this conversation, because I want to remember every detail of how ridiculous this gets. Oh, it gets better. Her new attorney, apparently she couldn't afford the old one after the criminal case, is arguing that property owners have a legal duty to identify themselves to prevent good faith mistakes by community organizations. I leaned back in my chair, marveling at the legal creativity. So her defense is that she was acting in good faith when she stole my property? Exactly. She's also claiming that your failure to stop her sooner makes you complicit in any harm done to the community. This was too perfect. Karen Whitfield had just handed me the opportunity to expose every detail of her operation in open court, with media coverage and public records that would follow her forever. Marcus, I want you to do something for me. Name it. Don't settle. Don't negotiate. I want this to go to trial, and I want it to be as public as possible. 3 months later, I found myself sitting in the Riverside County Courthouse, watching Karen Whitfield's attorney attempt to explain why his client deserved damages for being caught breaking the law on someone else's property. The courtroom was packed. Local news stations had picked up the story, fascinated by the spectacle of an HOA president suing the man whose trail she'd tried to steal. Several Lakewood Estates residents were in attendance, looking mortified as details of their former HOA president's scheme were laid out in excruciating detail. Karen took the stand wearing a conservative navy suit, her demeanor a far cry from the confident authority figure who had once stood guard at my trail entrance. Mrs. Whitfield, her attorney began, please tell the court about your experience serving the Lakewood Estates community. I was elected HOA president because I cared about protecting our property values and maintaining high standards for our neighborhood, Karen said, her voice barely audible. Everything I did was in the best interests of our residents. And when you implemented security measures on the Crystal Lake Trail, what was your understanding of the legal situation? Our legal research indicated that property owners had the right to control access through their developments. We were trying to protect our residents from overcrowding and maintain the peaceful character of our community. I watched the jury's faces as she spoke. Several members looked skeptical, particularly when she described charging $75 per day as a reasonable access fee. When Marcus stood up for cross-examination, the real show began. Mrs. Whitfield, you've testified that you were acting in good faith based on legal research. Can you tell the court who conducted this research? Karen shifted uncomfortably. Our board consulted with multiple sources. I'm asking specifically who told you that you could legally seize control of a public trail. Our information came from various community members with expertise in local government. Are you referring to Jennifer Morrison's husband, who you believed worked for the county planning department? Karen's face flushed. That was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that led you to believe you could take over an entire trail system worth millions of dollars? We never intended to take over anything. We were just trying to manage access through our community. Marcus walked to the evidence table and picked up a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a recording of Ms. Whitfield's own words on October 15th, where she explicitly stated her intention to gain management control over every trail from Crystal Lake to Meadowbrook State Park. My phone had automatically uploaded that conversation to my cloud storage, something Karen's attorney had apparently failed to investigate during discovery. As the recording played, Karen's voice filled the courtroom. We're considering expanding our control to the entire trail system in this region. A well-organized HOA could run the whole system at half the cost while actually turning a profit. The jury's expressions shifted from skeptical to openly hostile. Karen had just been caught lying under oath about the scope of her intentions. Mrs. Whitfield, Marcus continued, you've also claimed that Mr. Johnson had a duty to identify himself as the property owner. Can you explain why you never bothered to research who actually owned the trail before seizing control of it? We assumed it was county property. Most trails are managed by local government. Did you contact the county to verify this assumption before installing gates and charging fees? Karen's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury could see that she had acted without performing even basic due diligence before implementing her scheme. But the moment I'd been waiting for came when Marcus introduced the financial records. Mrs. Whitfield, our investigation shows that you collected $18,347 in illegal fees over a 4-month period. Where did that money go? The funds were used for community improvements and security measures. Security measures like the $12,000 guard shack you built on Mr. Johnson's property without permission? We thought we had the right to make improvements. Marcus pulled out another document. According to these HOA financial records, $8,000 of the illegally collected fees were used to fund a community barbecue event at your personal residence. Can you explain how that constituted a trail improvement? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Karen had essentially thrown herself a party with money stolen from hikers and joggers trying to use public trails. The barbecue was a community-building event, Karen stammered. It helped bring residents together to discuss neighborhood issues. Issues like how to expand your illegal toll road operation to other trails? By the time Karen stepped down from the witness stand, her lawsuit was effectively over. But Marcus wasn't finished. The next witness was Janet Morrison from the County Planning Department, who testified that no one in county government had ever suggested privatizing the trail system. She also revealed that the county had been preparing its own lawsuit against the Lakewood Estates, HOA, for interference with a public utility before Karen's arrest had resolved the matter. Sheriff Martinez took the stand to describe the ongoing criminal investigation, which had expanded to include potential wire fraud charges related to Karen's false claims about government authorization. But my favorite witness was Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who had been reduced to tears by Karen's harassment. I had been walking that trail with my granddaughter every weekend for 5 years, she testified, her voice strong despite her small stature. It was our special time together. When that woman demanded to see my papers and threatened to call the police, my granddaughter asked me why the mean lady was trying to keep us from our favorite place. The jury was visibly moved. Several members glared at Karen, who was staring at her hands. Mrs. Chen, Marcus asked gently, what did you do when you were told you couldn't use the trail anymore? We stopped going. My granddaughter kept asking when we could go back to feed the ducks, and I didn't know what to tell her. I'm 78 years old, and I've never been treated like a criminal before. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my testimony simple and factual. I explained how I had acquired the trail system, the scope of my maintenance responsibilities, and the impact of Karen's illegal operation on both trail users and county tourism revenue. Mr. Johnson, Karen's attorney asked during cross-examination, don't you think you could have avoided this entire situation by simply identifying yourself as the owner from the beginning? Counselor, when someone blocks access to your property, demands money from people trying to use it, and threatens to expand their illegal operation to your entire business, the appropriate response isn't to negotiate. It's to call law enforcement. But surely you could have resolved this with a simple conversation? I looked directly at Karen. I tried that on day 1. Mrs. Whitfield's response was to increase her illegal fees and expand her operation. She made it clear that she wasn't interested in following the law. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Not only did they reject Karen's lawsuit entirely, but they also awarded me damages for legal fees, property restoration costs, and business interference. The total came to $127,000, which Karen would be paying in installments for the next decade. But the real victory came in the judge's final comments. "Mrs. Whitfield," Judge Richardson said, looking over his glasses with obvious disapproval, "this court has rarely seen such a clear-cut case of someone facing consequences for their own illegal actions and then attempting to blame the victim. Your conduct throughout this matter has been frivolous at best and fraudulent at worst." He paused to review his notes. "Furthermore, your testimony contained several statements that appeared to be perjurious, which this court is referring to the district attorney for potential additional criminal charges." Karen's face went white. Her attorney looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. This lawsuit was an abuse of the judicial system and a waste of court resources. In addition to the damages awarded to Mr. Johnson, you are hereby ordered to pay additional sanctions in the amount of $25,000 for filing a frivolous lawsuit. As we left the courthouse, I was approached by a reporter from the local television station. "Mr. Johnson, how do you feel about the verdict?" "I feel like justice was served," I said. "This was never about money. It was about ensuring that public trails remain accessible to everyone, regardless of what neighborhood they live in." What's your message to other property owners who might be considering similar restrictions? I thought for a moment. Do your research. Understand what you actually own and what rights others might have. And remember that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. The story made national news. HOA president's lawsuit backfires spectacularly was trending on social media for days. Karen Whitfield became an internet meme, the poster child for HOA overreach and entitled behavior, but the consequences extended far beyond embarrassment. The Lakewood Estates community faced a mass exodus of residents who were mortified by their association with Karen's actions. Property values in the development dropped significantly as potential buyers researched the community's history and decided they didn't want to live somewhere that had become synonymous with petty authoritarianism. The remaining residents voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, preferring to manage their own properties rather than risk another Karen Whitfield situation. Meanwhile, the trail system experienced a renaissance. Visitors came from across the state, drawn by the story and curious to see the famous trail where an HOA president had tried to charge the owner admission to his own property. I hired additional maintenance staff to handle the increased usage and installed new facilities, including improved parking areas and rest stations. The economic impact on local businesses was substantial, with restaurants, hotels, and outdoor equipment stores reporting significant increases in revenue from trail visitors. Karen's legal troubles weren't over. The district attorney did indeed pursue perjury charges based on her trial testimony, and the state attorney general's office opened an investigation into potential racketeering violations related to her systematic collection of illegal fees. 6 months after the trial, I received a handwritten letter addressed to David Johnson, trail owner. The return address was from a women's correctional facility 2 counties over. The letter was from Karen. "Mr. Johnson," it began in shaky handwriting, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to apologize for everything that happened. I realize now that I let the power go to my head and made terrible decisions that hurt a lot of people." She went on to explain that she'd been sentenced to 6 months in jail for the perjury conviction, followed by 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. Her husband had filed for divorce, her adult children weren't speaking to her, and she'd lost her house to pay legal fees and court-ordered restitutions. "I used to think I was protecting my community," the letter continued, "but I see now that I was just a bully with a clipboard. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you know that I've learned my lesson." The letter ended with a postscript, P. Thank you for keeping the trails open for everyone. I understand now how important they are to people like Mrs. Chen and her granddaughter. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Forgiveness was a process, but accountability had definitely been achieved. 2 years later, I was walking the Crystal Lake Trail on a beautiful spring morning when I encountered a familiar elderly woman feeding ducks near the shoreline with a young girl who looked about 7 years old. Mrs. Chen? I called out. She turned and smiled, recognition dawning in her eyes. Mr. Johnson, this is such a surprise. Her granddaughter looked up curiously as I approached. Emma, this is the nice man I told you about who makes sure we can always come visit the ducks, Mrs. Chen explained. Emma studied me seriously for a moment, then reached into her bag of breadcrumbs and offered me a handful. Do you want to help us feed them? As we stood by the water's edge, tossing bread to the grateful ducks, Mrs. Chen spoke quietly. I heard about what happened to that woman, tried to keep us away. I hope she's doing better now. I think she's learned some important lessons, I replied. Good, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Everyone deserves a second chance, but some lessons need to be learned the hard way. Emma tugged on my sleeve. Mr. Johnson, Grandma says you own all the trails. Does that mean you own the ducks too? I laughed. No, Emma. The ducks belong to themselves. I just make sure they have a safe place to live. That's good, she said seriously. Nobody should own the ducks. As I continued my walk, I reflected on how a simple desire to take my morning exercise had led to such an elaborate demonstration of justice. Karen Whitfield's attempt to control something she didn't own had ultimately strengthened the very thing she'd tried to restrict. The trail system was now more protected, better funded, and more widely appreciated than ever before. Public awareness of trail access rights had increased dramatically, making it much harder for future Karen Whitfields to attempt similar schemes. And every morning, as I complete my 5-mile loop around Crystal Lake, I'm reminded that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with grand gestures, but with simple persistence and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're right. The trail remains open to everyone, from corporate executives to retirees, from families with young children to college students studying for exams on the benches I've placed along the route. It serves exactly the purpose I'd envisioned when I first took responsibility for its care 2 decades ago. Karen Whitfield wanted to control the trail, and instead, she helped ensure it would remain free and accessible forever. Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting people defeat themselves through their own poor choices. But every now and then, when I pass the spot where her guard shack used to stand, I smile and remember the look on her face when she realized she'd been charging admission to a man who owned not just that trail, but every trail for 100 miles in any direction. Some lessons are worth learning the hard way, and some stories are worth telling for years to come.